Hello, everybody. Shavua Tov. Let's see, adjusting the light a little bit. I hope you had a wonderful Shabbat. We are back with Hasidut. And tonight we're going to be talking about Parshat Kedoshim that we just read today. And we're going to be talking about the first line. You'll notice the title tonight is Growing in Darkness, Growing in Light, because we're going to talk about what a mitzvah does when we do it. Sometimes we grow in darkness, as we're going to learn a little bit what that means, and then sometimes we grow in light. So let's jump into it so we can start to get to the meat of this teaching. But I'll start with a question for you, which is, how do you feel after you do something wonderful? After you do a mitzvah, after you study Torah, after you pray? What is the feeling that you get? So the Torah portion started today. Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. But Midrash. So he starts with the Midrash. By the way, he is the Kedushat Levi, late 18th century, mid-late 18th century Hasidic master. He says from the Midrash, Yachol Kamoni, could it be that we can really be holy like God? Says the Midrash. Talmud Lomar, Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem, Kedushati Lamala Mi Kedushatchem. He quotes a Midrash that says, really, God's holiness is this important phrase, Lamala Mi Kedushatchem. It's it's higher than yours. It's my holiness, says God, is greater than yours. It's above yours. Lamala mi kedushatchem. But there's a second way to read this Hebrew phrase. Shalom again, Yochel. I don't want to give it away yet, but lamala mi kedushatchem. There's two ways to understand that Hebrew phrase. The simple understanding is my holiness is higher than your holiness. It's more elevated than your holiness. But there's a second way to understand it, and we're going to get into that. He says, Hanir el libazed. It seems to me in this. Uchvar ha'erichu hakadmonim be'inyan hazeh. The early ones already talked at length about this, says the Kedushat Levi. Dahainu b'mesh yachol ha'adam legeshet el avodah hakodesh. How can a person truly approach holy service? Eza avodah shehu balev. He quotes the Talmud. What is that service that is from the heart? When we're trying to say, remember, the Torah portion said, "You shall be holy like God," and then he's asking the question, how do you even know God's holiness? He says there is one way, and that's Havei Omer. He quotes the Talmud and says, "Zo tefillah." Prayer. Prayer is the service of the heart, the way to approach God. Then he asks further. He says, and how is it? What is the method that one puts in front of their eyes the greatness of God? What does it actually mean to get ready to pray? He says, Omer, one should say to themselves, Ma'ani levakesh lizok lifnei hamelech hagadol. Who am I to request and to cry out before the great King? Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be God. Halo ani afar, am I not dust? Rima v'tolea, am I not destined for worms and maggots? Malei avonot v'sha'im, am I not full of transgressions? V'charkach, and afterwards, choshev ba'atzmo, one should think to themselves. After one should think to themselves, Mehayom v'hala ani mekabel alai ol malchut shamayim be'emet v'lev shalem. From today and onwards, I acquire on myself the yoke of heaven in truth and with a full heart. So he begins by saying, from the Torah portion, Shalom Bruno, glad you're here. Our Torah portion today said, you shall be holy because I, your God, am holy. But how do you know God? He starts by saying, really, it's prayer. Prayer is the only way to really serve God with the heart. And the way to do that, he says, is you have this mental kind of mantra that you do, where you say, am I really worthy to serve God? I'm dust and ashes. I'm full of transgressions. And then after you think that, you say, from today onwards, I acquire God in my heart. Okay, that's kind of an intro to where he's going to go with this. And every day, if one does that, if one prays with that kind of full heart, and that mindset that he just illustrated, you'll rise from level to level, madriga la madriga, from level to level. And then he quotes the book of Proverbs. He says, "Vayishmech chacham v'yosif lekach." A wise person will hear, and he'll add teaching. He'll add to his inheritance. And the adding part is important here, because he brings this teaching from the Talmud now. And this is where the darkness and light really starts to come in. We see this in Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat. He says, Ner Chanukah, the lights of Hanukkah. I bet you didn't think we were going to be talking about Hanukkah candles tonight. Beit Shammai omrim v'chulei, u'Beit Hillel omrim mosifa holech. Beit Shammai says, for the lights of Hanukkah, you start with 8, and you decrease 1 every day. Until the last night of Hanukkah, you're left with 1. Beit Hillel says you begin with 1, and you increase every day until you end with 8. And he says we learn from this an important teaching about how mitzvot affect us, and how mitzvot affect our holiness, and how mitzvot affect God's holiness. We learn an important lesson from that disagreement. And just to make sure we understand it, the disagreement is, Beit Shammai says for the Hanukkah candles, we light from 8 to 1. Beit Hillel says we light from 1 to 8. Perush, he says it's explained like this. Lefi, shebechol yom mehashmona yemei Chanukah, kasher mekayem mitzvah, u'mitzvah goreret mitzvah, azai mitabek la'avodah haborei baruch hu. He says every day when one does the mitzvah of lighting these Hanukkah candles, and the mitzvah, a mitzvah, we have this principle that a mitzvah causes us to do another mitzvah. Each and every mitzvah we do brings us closer to the service of the Creator. And every day when one does an additional mitzvah, one is drawn even closer to the Creator. And we find that every day, if one grows in mitzvah, does a mitzvah every day, if one prays, like he said earlier, each and every day, then one kind of goes from level to level, then more of God's godliness, God's mercy, God's greatness, however you understand what it means for God's essence to overflow. One has a greater access. One has greater access to that each and every day because of that constant growth. Because with each and every day, you're growing closer to knowing God. And so, when you do that, then you begin to have a sense of God's holiness. And in doing this, in this constant growth, doing a mitzvah each and every day, like the lighting the Hanukkah candles 1 every day, like praying, each and every day, he says, in doing this, it's possible to get to the level of ayin and to profound humility. Ayin, Aleph Yud Nun, it means nothingness. It's this, it's this great, ineffable, essence from which God comes from. God created the world from Ayin, from Ein Sof, from this endless expanse that we can't even understand. We call it nothingness, but he says it is nothingness, and it's also the way it looks, maybe for us as anava yetera, is humility, a pulling back. And in doing this, in going from level to level, mitzvah to mitzvah, when you daven each and every day, then you can grow and reach that level of Ein Sof, or reach that level of humility. Yochel, I see your comments. I'll translate them in just a moment. Ubeit Hillel. And Beit Hillel. Remember, let's go back to the Hanukkah candles. That's what I know we didn't think we were going to be talking about Hanukkah, but he says this is important to understand. Ubeit Hillel shehayu b'madregat anava b'yoter. Al ken divreihem mosif v'holech. And Beit Hillel, who is already on a level of humility. In the Talmud, it's understood that Beit Hillel kind of embodies humility. And so for Beit Hillel, when one does the mitzvot, one starts from a place of humility, a place representing Ein Sof, this expansive nothingness. And so we start with one candle for Beit Hillel. And each and every day when one does a mitzvah, according to Beit Hillel, the light that one shines grows. And it could be that light is a reflection of God's light, but whatever it is, if it's the light of Torah, you start from a place of humility, and each and every mitzvah, you grow a little bit more in that light. For Beit Shammai, when one does a mitzvah, he doesn't start necessarily from a place of humility. Instead, he sees the mitzvot as helping one achieve that place of humility. Remember, he says it's possible in doing mitzvot, in having a daily prayer practice, to go from level to level and to reach the level of ayin, to reach the level of nothingness, to reach the level of humility. And that is how Beit Hillel sees the Hanukkah candles. When we say he's decreasing every day, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, until the light gets smaller, to Beit Hillel, that's representing actually an increasing of humility, leading to darkness. We call it darkness, but really it's a reflection of humility, of pulling back, of recognizing the light in others, the light in God, the light in other things besides you. That is Beit Hillel's Chanukiah. He says the mitzvot aren't. For Beit Hillel, it's not a growing in light from a place of humility. Instead, the mitzvot are effective in actually teaching humility. And I think it's both. It's not, remember, in the Talmud, both of these arguments are retained, because both of the arguments are what we call in Masechet Eruvin, Divrei Elohim Chaim, the words of the living God. They both express truth about Jewish tradition. And so, yes, when you do mitzvot and prayer from a place of humility, like Beit Hillel, your light grows. 1, 2, 3, 4, until the 8th night, like on Hanukkah, you have a full glowing Chanukiah. If you don't do mitzvot from a place of humility, it's not lost. Like Beit Shammai, you start with a lot of light, and then each and every day, it decreases until you learn humility. But the ultimate goal, I believe, is the way we keep Hanukkah. And I know it's weird that we're talking about Hanukkah. We're in the middle of the Omer. But the way we keep Hanukkah is we light the candles going up, because that's the ultimate goal. Humility, I think, is step one. And then when you have, achieved that in yourself, in your soul, then when you do mitzvot, you do find light. Our light, like our world is guided by the light of Torah. We can guide others with this reflected light from God. Personally, I never, before learning this, I always saw Beit Shammai as decreasing the light, but I see now that really it's an increasing of darkness and an increasing of pulling back and an increasing of humility. We're not done with this teaching yet, but Yocheb, I want to respect what you've said and translate so far your comments. You've said, when it is said that we must be holy like God, in the first moment that sounds very strange, because how could we be holy like the eternal? However, we learn that even though we are flawed, we have conditions and tools that bring us closer to God. And then you say we can, yes, through tefillah, mitzvah, tread the path that makes us saints, you say. It's a subtle thing. The growth in the path of faith and closeness is well compared to the lights of Hanukkah. I think that's why he makes the comparison. Yeah, that's where the Midrash starts, is what do you mean? And we're actually going to go back to that now. What do you mean? You should be holy like God. That doesn't make sense. God, we just can't achieve that. So that's what he's saying here. He says we can't achieve it, but we can kind of reflect it. And so then I see, and Marvin, you also say unconditional humility is what we've seen throughout Jewish history. Yeah, we've seen it successfully in Moses. He's kind of our, paradigm for humility, and we've seen it. We've seen characters who are great paradigms and the opposite, and being full of their own ego, like Shaul, like King Saul. Yeah. Okay. Let's finish this teaching. We're gonna, Yocheb, I see your comment, but we're gonna go back to the Midrash. Remember Yochev's comment, how we began this. You shall be holy like God. Literally says, you shall be holy because I, your God, am holy. Leviticus 19. So he ends it by saying, Ze kavanat midrash. This is the intention of this midrash. Kedoshim tihiyu. You shall be holy. Yachol kamoni. Could you really be holy like me, God? Talmud Lomar, we teach, Ki kadosh Adoni Hashem, kedushati lemala mikedushatchem. My holiness is greater than your holiness. Lamala mikedushatchem. Nahainu. He says he's going to read it a little differently. Mechamat ro kedushatchem azai nitzkadesh shemi biyoter. Because of the abundance of your holiness, I am therefore sanctified. My name is sanctified even more. Because there's two ways to read this. Lamala mi kedushatchem, that mem, mi kedushatchem, can mean, it can be kind of a comparison. My holiness is higher than yours, but it could also be causative. My holiness is higher because of yours. So he's reading the Midrash a little differently. He says, my holiness is expanded when yours is expanded. When you sanctify, when you are holy in the world, my name becomes even more sanctified. V'hinei ma tov u'manayim. How great would it be, he says, l'chol ish ha'yisraeli lahat dabek b'midat anava. How wonderful would it be if every Jew embodied that sense of humility. Uchema amar hakatuv ekev anava yirat Hashem. As we say in Proverbs again, it's because of humility that the reverence for God is even possible. Va'az yigrom, and so therefore it is causative, he says. Sheyitz kadesh shmo hagadol b'zeh al yedei anashim. That God's holy name is sanctified by way of people. Al yedei anashim, by way of people. Az hem b'vadai chashuvim. And so we're actually important. We are chashuv. That people are important, but osim mitzvot, osim tovim, and when we do mitzvot, and when we do good deeds, we are taking part in the process of expanding God's holiness. Even so, people in their eyes are really like nothing when you take into account the eternal. But nevertheless, God's name is expanded in the masses. Ken yiten lanu Hashem yitbarach. He leaves us with a prayer. Midat anavash ar midot yisharot amen. He says, thus may God give us the quality of humility and all the other righteous characteristics. Amen. A beautiful teaching, in my opinion. Not only about the power of mitzvot to instill humility if we don't have it, but then also to expand the holiness of God in this world. So he says, you shall be holy. He's, I, your God, am holy. He reads the Midrash about that to say, you shall be holy because I, your God, am holy. And when you are holy, my name is further sanctified. You make me even holier. The holiness of my name becomes even more apparent because of your actions. With that, I'll also mention that we are in the midst of a daily mitzvah right now, the counting of the Omer, each and every day. We're a little more than halfway through. We have 3 weeks left. Tonight was night 28. And I'll invite you, if you haven't been counting, this is a great opportunity to take on a daily mitzvah and, to kind of visualize your own internal, soul Chanukiah. If you are feeling full of yourself, it's not a bad thing necessarily. You can see your Chanukiah is full, and every day when you do this mitzvah, grow in humility. Like Beit Shammai, taking away a candle every day and actually growing toward that quality of Ein Sof, that quality of humility. And if you have, the capacity to do it, this mitzvot from a place of humility, then let this daily mitzvah practice bring light to your eyes and pray that it is also light for others. So with that, I'll stick around just for a minute for questions and comments. And Yochel will translate your last comment now. You say from number 1 until reaching 8th. It makes me understand how we are growing, and it's like this every day. And going from 8th to 1st makes us walk the path of faith, humility, and approximation. Thank you, Yochel. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. I wish you a Shavua Tov. Have a wonderful week. Thank you, Marvin, for the Mazel Tov. For those who don't know, we had a baby girl last week. That's why Hasidut was so ill-prepared, because she was born 12:01 a.m., technically on Saturday. So thank you. Thank you, Marvin. My pleasure. Looking forward to more learning. Shavua Tov, and have a wonderful week, everybody.